Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be having a small discussion on the different eras of Star Wars publishing. Now, Star Wars has a ton of books. If you're talking specifically adult novels, there are something like 200, maybe 250 adult novels. It's huge. There are tons of them out there. And that doesn't even scratch the surface when you think about young adult, middle grade, and young reader novels. And so I'm going to be in this video specifically talking about the adult novel side of things. I will get into the other books in another video later on. But in this video, I'm going to talk about three specific eras of Star Wars books. The three eras are what I'm calling the Bantam era, where books like, Spectre of the Past or others were released. Then you have the Del Rey era, where you have books like the Legacy of the Force series. And then you have what I'm calling the Disney Del Rey era, which is Resistance Reborn and other books. And I'll get into the intricacies of all of them in a second. I am not going to focus on what I'm calling the pre-Bantam era, which was, from about 1978 through about 1983. During this time period, you had Splinter of the Mind's Eye. You also had the first 3 Han Solo books come out, the ones by Brian Daley. And then we also had the 3 Lando books come out, as well as the novelizations of episodes 4, 5, and 6. So during that time, you had about 10 books come out. The reason I'm not really referring to this period is that this period was not a true overall publishing arc, in that they weren't telling interconnected stories. They weren't really doing a push to see if they could do more Star Wars books. They were just, all right, we're just going to do one here, do one here. They were doing individual contracts for 3 books or 1 book, and they really weren't focused on doing more in the future. And it abruptly ended after the Lando books. They didn't do any more books for quite a while. And so that era, I'm not really going to spend much more time on. However, the 3 main eras I will get into. I will talk about some of the pros of those eras, why they are great and why they work, and some of the cons of those eras, why that era maybe doesn't work as well. And so to begin with, I'm going to be talking about the Bantam era. And if you see this little symbol of the Bantam Spectra, you understand what I'm referring to. So Bantam is a publisher, I should say, that had the license for Star Wars books from 1991 to 1999. One of the editors at Bantam, Lou Aronica, said that he wanted to publish Star Wars books in hardcover. This was in late '89. And he was told that he was crazy, and he put his job on the line. And this story, you can hear Timothy Zahn tell it whenever you go to a convention. He tells it quite often at conventions. But Lou Aronica put his job on the line, and Timothy Zahn was chosen to write the first of the Thrawn books for Bantam, and they were all going to be in hardcover. And all of them hit the New York Times list, the first one specifically hitting number 1 on the New York Times list. And so that sparked a huge push to do more Star Wars books. And during this time, Bantam published what I believe were about 40. I haven't gotten the exact count, but it's about 40 Star Wars novels that Bantam published. And they had some great success during this time. Quite a few, if not most of the books published during this time became New York Times bestsellers. They had immense growth rate. They had great sales. They kept the public interested, and they had light, small connections between the books. And you had books trilogies like the Thrawn trilogy, which I mentioned earlier. You also had the Jedi Academy trilogy, which was really top selling. And then you had other series like the X-Wing series, which was released in mass market paperback, but was still a New York Times best-selling series. And then you had other books like the Hand of Thrawn duology, which were bestsellers and very well regarded. And then there were individual books like Truce at Bakura and that maybe necessarily weren't rated the best, but were doing very well sales-wise. And so that was one of the pros of this era, was they had a lot of bestsellers, while at the same time, a lot of people were liking the stories. One of the cons, however, is that Bantam really didn't have a direct plan for anything. The authors would talk amongst themselves on small details. All right, how are we going to use Mara Jade? Where's her story going? Okay, I'm going to use your Corran Horn in my books. Can you use my character in your books? That type of thing. But they didn't create an overall plan. And so characters like Luke got tossed around a bunch during this time. He had so many love interests that went nowhere. And in this time, they kept making decisions for the characters that didn't really feel authentic, didn't feel like Luke would make actually that character, that as a character would make that decision. Now, sometimes it worked really well, but oftentimes it didn't. And this is mostly in the standalone novels. A few of the trilogies did this. The Black Fleet Crisis, as well as the Corellian trilogy, did this, but it was mostly the standalones that had this issue. And as a result, when you mention some of these books around Star Wars fans, books like Children of the Force, or the Truce at Bakura, or even this one, you have to be brave to mention this, The Crystal Star. You mention those books, you will get some visceral reactions from Star Wars fans, people who love Star Wars books, because those books are just not well regarded. And so you do have that pro and con where they didn't map it out, and as a result you got some really, whoa, where'd that come from books. So that's the Bantam era. Then you have the era of Star Wars publishing that is what I'm calling the Del Rey era. This era really spans from 1999 to about 2013. During this time period, in the late 90s, Bantam knew they were losing the contract, and so Lucasfilm put it up for essentially like an auction to try to see who's going to get us the best deal for Star Wars books. And Del Rey ended up winning that contract. Ironically, Del Rey ended up getting bought out a few months later by Random House, who also owned Bantam. So it kind of stayed in the family if you think about it that way. But when Del Rey took over, they made a conscious decision that they were going to do overarching stories with lots of books, with lots of new characters, and that they were going to really publish a lot of books. During this time, during the Del Rey time, you have somewhere around 100 books got published in this 13, 14-year period of time. It was a ton of publishing that happened during this time. And so with this, you had big series. You had the New Jedi Order, 19 novels plus novellas. Then you had books like The Legacy of the Force, 9 novels. And then you had The Fate of the Jedi, 9 novels. You had a lot of big stories. And at the same time, you had a lot of standalones and a lot of trilogies like the Darth Bane trilogy and standalones like Darth Plagueis, and all of these are well regarded. And so the pros are that they started planning things out, really expanding the story, and at the same time, where Bantam failed in that they didn't have a plan, they also weren't allowed to do anything. You couldn't kill off Han, Luke, Leia, or Chewbacca, or anyone else like that. But when Del Rey took over, they took risks, and they would kill off characters. And it was a much more important, impactful event happening to the storyline. And so that's why Del Rey, sometimes the stories produce a more emotional response from the fandom than some of the Bantam books. And then some of the other pros of it are that you just had some great books come out, just standalones, some fantastic standalones come out. But the other problem is that the negative of the Del Rey era is that they produced so many books during this time that you were inevitably going to have duds, and it was so hard to keep up with. There are so many Star Wars books in the EU when you combine the Bantam era and the Del Rey era that once you were behind, it was very difficult to catch up. I know people who have been reading Star Wars books for 10 or 15 years, and they're still catching up because there's so many books out there. And that was one of the problems, was once you missed one book in a series, it was easy to miss the next one and the next one, and now all of a sudden you've missed the entire Fate of the Jedi series, and now you're 9 books behind. And so it was very easy to get lost, and you could jump in and just start reading a series. You could start reading The Fate of the Jedi if you hadn't read Legacy of the Force, but you'd be spoiled on the Legacy of the Force. And thus, you saw the readerships didn't always incline. Oftentimes with series, they would decline because people were behind on series, and so it was harder to get into them. And so Del Rey had that issue of connecting to all the readers, whereas because the Bantam era just had trilogies, and they were kind of all over the place and didn't really spoil each other, Bantam, you could jump in just about anywhere and follow everything that was happening in the story. So those are the pros and cons of the Del Rey timeline. And then you have what I'm calling the Disney Del Rey timeline. Now, when it comes to adult novels, Del Rey still owns the rights to and the contract to tell the adult novels, but under Disney's leadership of Lucasfilm, there's a very different way that they're made. One way that makes it markedly different, this was started in about 2014 with the publishing of A New Dawn, is that adult novels are no longer the only thrust of main stories. You had a few young adults in the EU that would cross over into the canon with the characters and the events happening, but very rarely. Now, the YA novels that now Disney Lucasfilm Press was publishing have direct consequences to the adult novels. This is most seen in the High Republic series, which is coming out 2021, 2022, 2023. That's that big series. But it's also prevalent when you look at the books like Leia, Princess of Alderaan, which connects to Lost Stars, and it connects to Bloodline and all this type of things. And so young adult became more important. And so one of the advantages of the canon is that they were able to branch out and say, all right, if you love a romance, we've got romance for you in Dark Disciple. If you love dark Sith Lord stuff, we got Lords of the Sith. If you like Rebels, we got a Rebels novel for you. If you like the sequels, we got a sequel series for you. Like, they had things that were designed to appeal to specific audiences while still encompassing the whole. And that's why the new novels are so easy to market, because you can say, oh, you're just getting started. Well, they're all there's something for everyone in there. And once you hook them with a new novel, then they might want to read something else. At the same time, this is both a pro and a con. The new novels, with the exception of the High Republic, have not told an overarching story that's had huge galaxy, wide events, because they've left that for the movies and television shows. They've focused on smaller character-driven stories, focused on one character on one mission, rather than the whole Jedi Order or something. So as a result, they don't have the feeling of excitement and epicness that the EU had, and they just really struggled with that until the High Republic came out. And at the same time, it was easier to read all of them, because if you read them out of order, you really weren't missing anything. You could read Catalyst before reading Tarkin, even though Tarkin came out first, and it's not really going to affect your enjoyment of either one. They're both standalones that have some connections, but they're both very much contain stories. And so I think that this has helped them in getting a very broad audience, but it's hurt them because it hasn't necessarily made a highly devoted audience. And so, as you could probably see from where I'm going with all of this, is that there is no perfect formula that the different eras of Star Wars have made. Some eras are more standalone than others. Some eras are more connected than others. Some eras turn off casual fans. Some eras are naturally turn off more diehard fans. Some eras are better for sales, I think, and some eras are worse for sales, although I believe that Star Wars has, if you look at the overall Star Wars has been pretty consistent with sales. I don't think there's been many dips that I could see. And so there has been dips in the number of titles published, but it's overall, you could see it's been a very steady number of titles published. And so there's just different things that different people like. I'll be honest, I love interconnected stories. It's one of the reasons I've loved the last 20 years of Star Trek publishing. It's one of the reasons I love Star Wars publishing. So I really like it when I get to read a 19-book series, even though not all 19 books are great. The feeling of getting to read a book series that huge is rewarding. And so in some aspects, the Del Rey EU timeline is really good. And then there's sometimes I just love my standalones. I just love certain books that just hit the right niche for me, like Kenobi, like Cloak of Deception, like Outbound Flight. I just love reading those standalones. I can reread those all the time. And so those ones work during the Del Rey timeline. And then there's some canon ones like Master and Apprentice that also really work. Then there's also some Bantam books that are really good, like the X-Wing series, and I look fondly over those. Because I'm so close to the canon material, I don't know how the canon will feel 10 years from now, but I feel very fond memories of the Bantam books. Most of them, the really good ones. The bad ones, take them or leave them. So there's a very difficult measurement of which one's better or which one's worse. And honestly, if I had to rank it, I would probably say that the Del Rey timeline in the middle, the one from 1999 to 2013, is my favorite, but it is a very close horse race. And I don't know what my number 2 is because I feel equally the same about the Bantam era and the Disney era. And so my whole goal with this is to say that all Star Wars books have a lot of worth and a lot of interest, at least to me. And so I think that if you're interested in starting any of them, I think that all 3 eras have merit and add value, and all 3 eras have references to the other eras. The Bantam era heavily influenced the Del Rey era, which heavily influenced the Disney era. So they all have certain connections, even though some stuff isn't canon and some stuff is canon. They all have influences that drive them all. And so let me know what you think about all the Star Wars eras. Which era is your favorite? Which era is your least favorite? Which eras do you think need more love in the fandom? Comment down below. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And look for more videos on Star Wars and Star Trek and other things. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.